Can you explain a little bit what is happening with the billions of dollars that circulate related to human bodies?
Yeah, there's basically two different areas. There's the organ trafficking, right, which is different from body parts. These were two different episodes we did for Trafficked, my Nat Geo show. So organ trafficking is unfortunately a booming industry because I think it's something like 17 Americans die every day. I believe I might have gotten that wrong, but it was a really high number of Americans die because they are on a wait list for organs, and those organs never show up, and they die on that wait list. And because of that, there's people who resort to the black market, who go to other countries. And in our story, it was actually in Mexico and Colombia. We traveled to Mexico and Colombia. And yeah, there was a black market for organs. So Americans could travel to these countries and procure an organ, liver, a kidney, whatever organ you needed, cornea, eye corneas, organs that you needed to be able to live. A lot of times from poor people. A lot of reports that were done 20 years ago, I think it's gotten much better, but in India, where there were black market operators that would go out to the poorest of the poorest neighborhoods and towns and procure people and say, if you give me a kidney, I will pay you $10,000. And in many cases, these are people who need that money to survive, and they're willing to give that kidney. In our story, what we found, although we could never fully corroborate that this was happening, we interviewed a guy called El Deshuesador, the deboner, who apparently works for the Cartel del Golfo in Mexico. And he said, and again, we could never corroborate his story, and we made this very transparent in our reporting, where he said they would snatch immigrants who were making their journey through the Darien Gap all the way to the United States. And because if something happens to them, nobody will know, because they're oftentimes with no communication, making this very dangerous journey all the way to the U.S. And many people, as we know, disappear while making these journeys, and how they would snatch migrants and basically kill them and take their organs first, and then kill them. It was incredibly horrific and really tragic. So that's the organ trade. It is not, it turns out, a Hollywood fabrication. This actually exists. Even I was shocked to the extent to which this exists. But then there's the body parts industry, which is bananas, which I had no idea it existed, hadn't even seen in Hollywood either once we started reporting on it. There's a burgeoning market called the oddities market, where you can go on places like Facebook or other marketplaces and buy a skull, or buy a piece of bone, or buy or some of the popular ones, a piece of skin. Inked skin to make wallets. There's people making wallets with human skin. Sometimes if the skin has tattoos, it will go for more money. I interviewed a funeral director who showed me a pen where inside the pen, it had like this see-through area, and inside was a piece of human brain that he had procured online, that he had bought online. So there is, again, a very thriving black market for these body parts everywhere. And then there's also the medical establishment.
Are wombs included in this kind of, renting wombs? Yeah.
Oh, the surrogacy trade. That's another thing as well. Yes. But also, doctors all around the world. And in order to be able to train, you need body parts. And so that they were procuring, jaws and teeth for dentist practitioners, and we filmed it's so crazy. We filmed in a cemetery in Mexico City where they were going and digging for old skulls and jaws of people to sell them on the black market.
What does a jaw go for on the black market?
I didn't ask about this jaw at the time. I believe the skull could go anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000, sometimes more.
I didn't know there was a black market for surrogacy.
Yes, it is allowed. Surrogacy exists in the United States. It's actually allowed. It's not allowed in a lot of countries, but it is in the United States. However, it's prohibitively expensive. So it can cost upwards of $200,000, $250,000. There's a lot of people out there that can't have children, And surrogacy is a very viable way for people to have children. And so they're traveling to places like the Ukraine before the war and during the war. Actually, it's still happening, and Kenya and and India until they close it off. Other parts of the world where surrogacy is allowed and much cheaper. But the problem with it in places like Kenya was what happened is because the laws are very sort of gray. There isn't an established rules as what can and cannot be done, and a lot of times it is people. Disadvantaged people, poor people who get were exploited. And so there were these black market operators that were going up to these women and promising, if you have a child for this couple, you'll make them very happy. We'll also pay you $40,000. Or actually, it cost $40,000 to have a child. They were promised $5,000, $10,000. And there were stories of women who woke up in the hospital without the baby they were carrying and without the $5,000 and were abandoned.
I don't know if it was Harper's or maybe it was The Atlantic. They did a whole piece on what's happening in some of these places. It's their factories for women who are kept there.
100%. They're kept in these homes.
And they're forced to carry children.
Yeah.
Well, and I was just thinking, especially with the medical stuff, if it's clear that we don't have enough organs in this country, is there not a way for us to establish some sort of system that is not criminal, right? By which people can have access to organs? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that the organ system and the wait list is completely broken. There have been many people trying to fix it. The problem is the moment you make it a business.
Like Karl Marx said, that anytime you commodify anything, right? Love, sex, like that's what happens. I mean, that's, well, and I think also what this reminded me of, and I don't know if you feel this, like, I don't necessarily believe in Satan. It's not a thing, but in literature, in Western literature, there's this notion of all the times that people can be tempted, right? It's like the devil and Daniel Webster, that the devil is kind of always lurking, right? Always looking to test you. What if this? What if that? And it feels like your business, right, is encountering situations where kind of good and evil are really hanging in the balances. And I think the subtleties that you're picking up on, the hurt people hurt notion, right, is showing that things that are evil it's not so black and white.
Yeah, I love that you say that, because I think usually it's easier to find the bad in people, right? And we tend to focus more on that. And I think much of my job throughout these past 20 years has been in the midst of the most dangerous and most evil corners of the world, trying to find the goodness. Because I do believe there's good and bad in all of us. But it is harder sometimes to find the good in people. And that's always been the challenge for me and what I want to do with my work.
Can we talk about exotic pets?
Yeah, tigers. We did an episode on tiger trafficking.
Everyone saw the Tiger King back when COVID happened. I think that exploded the idea in people's minds, but there's a lot more pets that are out there.
But there's also a cuisine aspect to this, right? And there's also medicinal properties. There are certain...
In Asia, particularly in China, for many years, they believed that tiger bone was really great for your health. And then it's the shark fin soup, which is not medicinal, but it is a luxury item in China. So for big important banquets, and if you're trying to impress somebody, you serve them.
So is this some of the black market that we're seeing is for both?
Yeah, supposed medicinal and luxury goods. Yes, and we went to a restaurant in New York. It's banned, by the way. Shark fins are banned in the United States, but I went to a restaurant in New York where I ordered shark fin soup and they offered it.
Can we touch on honeypots? Yeah. You recently interviewed a honeypot. Can you describe to people what that is and a little bit about how they operate? Yeah,
it was really fascinating. So she's a Russian sex spy, or so she says she is.
Can you explain what a sex spy is?
Yeah, so it's somebody that uses their charm and sexuality to get state secrets or to do the things that the state wants you to do. So in her case, actually, it wasn't so much She wasn't so much like a CIA agent trying to find secrets, but she was trying to infiltrate, according to her story, infiltrate these drug and criminal groups in Russia in order to get information that she would then give to the government to go after these criminal groups.
And she was recruited by the government, supposedly.
Yes, recruited by the government. There's been a whole podcast about her whole life. Multiple episodes of this podcast were out there. I was fascinated by her story, started looking into her story, had lots of questions about the veracity of her story. And in my podcast, allowed her to tell her story and then confronted her with some of the holes that I'd found in her story and allowed her to give me her answers and allowed my listeners to decide whether they believe her story or not. Do sex spies exist around the world? 100%. Is it possible that she was out there working for the government and using her sexuality and
sexpionage?
Yeah, to find these secrets? Absolutely. Was she used by the Russian spy apparatus, intelligence apparatus? Because what we found out is that there's actually a lot of sex workers that are used for the exact same purpose, right? The government will go up to a escort and say, we will pay you this amount to infiltrate and get into this person's house, find out secrets and things about this person. And that happens a lot. I think the part that is still, that I still have questions on is whether she was actually trained by the intelligence services, or if it's not my place to say whether she's saying the truth or not. I think our listeners will hear and decide for themselves.
Yeah, it is interesting to think, are they just approaching women who are already in this trade and asking them to work for them, or is there government organizations that are training them to do this?
Right. And in her interview with us and with me, she talked about how they trained her in detail of how to perform a blowjob and how to have sex and how to really get what she wants from a man.
There's a blowjob that gives you information and there's one that doesn't?
Apparently there is one.
You recently had Anna Delvey on. I saw the fictionalized version of her life. I came out a few years ago and it was shocking. Tell us a little bit about her story. Obviously, people should listen to the episode on your podcast, but give us a little bit of a primer or teaser.
Yeah, so she was known as the fake heiress, right? She arrived in New York and she portrayed herself as being part of this billionaire family from Germany. And she started basically staying in hotels for free. She's racking up this bill that she wasn't able to pay, convincing her friends to go on these very lavish, luxurious trips that then she would ask their friends to put on their credit card because she couldn't pay. But she actually got in some boardrooms with some bankers and forged documents and convinced them that if they gave her a loan for hundreds of thousands of dollars, that she would be able to pay them back because she had all these documents that proved that she was a heiress of these millions and millions of dollars in Germany, when in fact all of that was a lie. And she ended up being caught. She did time in prison, and she is now out there. She's still with an ankle bracelet, actually. She wears an ankle bracelet because she's she has an immigration case going. I found her to be one of the hardest guests I've ever interviewed in my entire life. Most of the people that I interview, former sex spies or former cocaine traffickers, people who did horrific crimes and come to my podcast and talk openly about what they did and what they've learned. And the podcast is all about redemption and really trying to learn the consequences that led you to that life. And then what have you done since to try to come out the other way? And the redemption, again, being a real big through line. And with her, it was really hard to get her. She didn't want to talk about her crimes. She portrayed the friends that she traveled with as being losers because they never amounted to anything. And every time I'd ask her questions, she would just say, I don't know. I don't want to talk about that. So at one point I said, so Anna, you don't want to talk about your past. You don't want to talk. I'm trying to talk to you about what you're doing now, what you want to do in the future. Even that seems to be hard for you to talk about. I don't understand why you came on my podcast. And she said, I don't know either because you're not paying me. And I was like, I'm not, but I am trying to sort of understand you and you're making it really hard for me. So what began as a curiosity on my part to learn more about the Anna Delvey behind the Netflix scripted series turned into somewhat of a argument between us, which made it very uncomfortable. Not a situation that I'm comfortable with at all.
Well, it's got to be hard also. You're confronting people, right, about some of their darkest truths. But if they are not ready to sort of come clean, there's going to be all those defenses up, right? Which I would imagine would happen much more with, a cocaine trafficker or an assassin than with someone like her. But that's the psychology of it, right?
There was aspects of her character in the fictionalized version that had a lot of similarities to that. Like just a refusal to acknowledge that anything was wrong, a deny till you die.